Look, I know how this is going to sound, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because what happened to me in those mountains changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I've been paragliding for about 7 years now. Started in the foothills near where I grew up, then gradually worked my way up to bigger, more remote launches. There's something about being up there, just you and the wind and the silence, that makes everything else fade away. All the stress, all the noise of regular life, it just disappears when you're floating above the world. Mid-January of last year, I planned a solo trip to the Northern Cascades in Washington. I know, winter paragliding is risky. The conditions are unpredictable, the thermals are weird, and if something goes wrong, you're pretty much on your own. But that's also what makes it incredible. The forecast looked perfect that week. Clear skies, light winds, temperatures right around 20 degrees. I'd scouted the launch point the previous summer, a peak at about 9,000 feet with a good approach and a clear landing zone about 5 miles away. The morning I set out, everything felt right. The hike up took about 90 minutes through knee-deep snow, and by the time I reached the peak, the sun was fully up, making the whole mountain range glitter like it was covered in diamonds. The launch went perfectly. For the first 20 minutes, everything was exactly what I'd hoped for. I was circling above a ridge, just enjoying the flight, when I spotted something on an adjacent peak, maybe half a mile away. At first, I thought it was another person, but something seemed off. The figure was too tall. I pulled up my binoculars and focused on it. That's when my stomach dropped. The thing was covered in dark reddish-brown fur, standing upright on an exposed outcrop. It was maybe 8 feet tall with massive shoulders. And even from that distance, I had the unmistakable feeling it was looking directly at me. I lowered the binoculars and tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. Every rational part of my brain was working overtime to explain it away. A bear, maybe. Bears can stand on their hind legs. But this thing had been just standing there, balanced and upright, like that was its natural position. The proportions were all wrong for a bear. Too tall, too human-like in the shoulders and torso. I raised the binoculars again, and that's when things got truly strange. The creature had moved. In the few seconds I'd looked away, it had left the outcrop and was now on the ridge itself, maybe 100 yards from where it had been standing. And it was moving in my direction, following the ridgeline parallel to my flight path. I watched it for about 30 seconds, and in that time it covered what must have been 200 yards. The snow up on that ridge was deep. I could see the drifts from where I was flying. Some of them had to be waist high or more. But this thing was moving through it like the snow wasn't even there. Long, loping strides that ate up distance with impossible ease. It wasn't running exactly, but it was moving fast. Way too fast for those conditions. I've hiked in snow that deep before, and it's exhausting. Every step is a battle. This thing made it look effortless. I tried to tell myself I was seeing things wrong. The distance, the angle, the bright snow playing tricks with perspective. It had to be something like that. I adjusted my flight path, angling away from the ridge, trying to circle around and head toward my planned landing zone. My hands fumbled with the control toggles, and I had to consciously steady my breathing. The creature changed direction to match me. I could see it more clearly now as I circled. It would run for a bit, covering huge distances in just a few strides, then stop and look up directly at where I was flying. Then it would adjust its course and run again. The behavior was deliberate, calculated, purposeful. It wasn't just some animal that happened to be moving in the same direction. It was tracking me, following my flight line, making sure to stay underneath me. My mind was racing now, trying to figure out what to do. I checked my altitude, still at about 7,000 feet, plenty of height to work with. My original landing zone was about 3 miles ahead, a big open meadow near the logging road where I'd parked my truck that morning. But if this thing kept following me, it would be there when I landed. And then I'd have at least a 2-mile hike back through deep snow and thick forest with whatever this was somewhere nearby. The thought of landing with that thing waiting for me made my blood run cold. I'd be vulnerable during the landing, focused on setting down safely, gathering up my wing. And then I'd be on foot, carrying heavy equipment, moving slowly through deep snow. If this thing wanted to get to me, that would be the perfect time. I checked my altitude again, still enough height to make a different choice. I remembered seeing a smaller clearing on my way up the mountain that morning, maybe a mile to the east of my current position. It was further from my truck, and I didn't know the terrain as well, but it would get me on the ground faster. And maybe, just maybe, I could lose this thing in the trees. I made the decision and started my descent, banking hard to the right. The wind was picking up as I dropped altitude, which made the glide rougher. The wing would surge and drop, and I had to make constant corrections to stay on course. I kept looking down, scanning the white landscape below, trying to spot the creature in all that snow and forest. But I couldn't see it anymore. The trees were too thick in places, creating dark shadows where anything could be hiding. The terrain was a maze of ridges and valleys, all covered in that pristine white snow. And that somehow made everything worse. When I could see it, at least I knew where it was. Now it could be anywhere. It could be ahead of me, behind me, circling around to cut me off. The not knowing was almost worse than seeing it. I focused on the approach to the clearing, trying to push the fear down and concentrate on flying. The clearing looked smaller than I remembered from the air, maybe 50 yards across, surrounded by dense pine forest on all sides. The snow had to be knee-deep at least. Not ideal conditions for a landing, but I was committed now. There was no turning back. The final approach was rougher than I wanted. The wind near the ground was gusty and unpredictable, swirling around the trees in ways that made the wing hard to control. I came in too fast, trying to compensate for a sudden gust that nearly pushed me into the trees. My feet hit the snow at a bad angle and went out from under me immediately. I hit hard and skidded about 10 feet across the snow before the wing collapsed behind me with a soft whoosh. For a second, I just lay there on my back, wind knocked out of me, staring up at the blue sky through the pine branches. My shoulder hurt where I'd landed on it, and I could already feel the cold wetness of snow melting against my back where it had gotten inside my jacket. Then reality crashed back in, and survival instinct took over. I rolled onto my hands and knees and started gathering up the paraglider as fast as my shaking hands would allow. The fabric was spread out across the snow, the lines tangled in some brush at the edge of the clearing. I yanked them free without caring if I damaged anything. Right now, speed was more important than being careful with my equipment. My hands were already getting cold, and they were shaking so badly I could barely grip the fabric. I stuffed the wing into my bag without folding it properly, just cramming it in as fast as I could. Normally, I take my time with this, making sure everything is neat and organized. The wing is expensive, and improper packing can damage it. But right now, I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted to be ready to move. The whole process took maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. Every second I spent in that clearing felt like a second too long. The forest around me was completely silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering in the trees, no wind rustling through the branches. Just my own breathing, fast and shallow with fear, and the sound of my heart hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. The temperature was dropping fast. It had to be around 15 degrees now, maybe less. My breath came out in thick clouds that hung in the still air. I finished packing the last of my gear and stood up, hoisting the heavy pack onto my shoulders. The weight settled onto my back, and I adjusted the straps with numb fingers. I looked around the clearing carefully, scanning the tree line. The shadows under those pines were deep and dark, even with the sun overhead. The trees grew so close together in places that you couldn't see more than a few feet into the forest. Anything could be standing in those shadows, watching me, and I'd never see it until it was too late. I had to pick a direction. My truck was to the west, about 3 miles through unknown terrain. If I headed generally downhill and tried to angle west, I should eventually hit the logging road, even if it was further down the mountain than where I'd parked. The snow was going to make everything harder, but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't stay in this clearing. I picked what looked like the easiest path, a slight gap in the trees where the undergrowth seemed less dense, and started walking. The snow immediately swallowed my legs up to the knees. Every step was exhausting, requiring me to lift my leg high to clear the snow, then push it forward and down. The weight of the pack made everything harder, throwing off my balance. Within 5 minutes, my thighs were burning and I was breathing hard. The forest closed in around me as I left the clearing behind. The pine trees were thick here, their branches heavy with snow. It was darker under the canopy and quieter somehow. The silence felt oppressive, unnatural. I'd hiked in plenty of forests before, and there's always some kind of sound. Birds, insects, wind, something. This silence felt wrong, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I'd been walking for about 15 minutes, fighting through the deep snow, when I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. It came from off to my right, maybe 50 yards away through the trees, a heavy sound like something big moving through the underbrush, branches snapping with sharp cracks, snow falling from disturbed trees with soft thumps. I froze, listening hard. The sound stopped when I stopped. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, my breath making clouds in the cold air, straining to hear anything. Nothing. Just that oppressive silence again. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just snow falling from a branch naturally. That happens sometimes, especially when the temperature changes. I started walking again, pushing through the snow. After just a few steps, the sound started again. Same direction, same distance, moving parallel to me, keeping pace. When I sped up, pushing harder through the snow, the sound sped up too. When I stopped to listen, it stopped. Something was following me, staying just out of sight in the thick forest. I tried to convince myself it was a deer or an elk. This was their habitat after all. Maybe I'd spooked one and it was moving away from me, just happened to be going in the same direction. But the sounds were too heavy, too deliberate, and deer would have bolted when they heard me coming. They wouldn't follow along beside me. That wasn't deer behavior. I picked up my speed as much as I could, pushing through the snow faster. My legs were burning from the effort, and I was breathing hard now, sucking in cold air that hurt my lungs. The sounds to my right sped up too, matching my pace exactly. Branches continued to snap, closer now, maybe only 30 yards away. Then something flew out of the forest and smashed into a tree trunk about 10 feet ahead of me. The impact was loud enough to make me jump, and I stumbled backward in the snow. It was a chunk of ice about the size of a softball. It had hit the tree hard enough to explode into powder, leaving a dark mark on the bark. Pieces of ice scattered across the snow. I stared at it, my mind trying to process what had just happened. Ice doesn't just fall from trees like that. It was winter. But there wasn't any freezing rain, no ice buildup on the branches overhead. This had come from the side at an angle. It had been thrown. A second chunk of ice came whistling through the air. I saw this one coming and ducked instinctively. It hit the snow near my feet with a heavy thump, sending up a spray of white powder. A third piece followed seconds later, hitting a tree behind me with another loud crack. Something was throwing ice at me, deliberately, aiming for me. I didn't think after that. Thinking was over. My body just reacted. I turned and ran, or at least tried to run. In snow that deep, it was more like a frantic, lurching scramble. I pushed forward with everything I had, high-stepping through the powder, using my arms for balance, the pack bouncing heavily on my back with every step. Behind me, whatever was following me wasn't bothering to stay hidden anymore. I could hear it crashing through the forest, moving fast. Branches snapped like gunshots. Snow fell from disturbed trees in heavy clumps. I could hear the rhythm of it moving, heavy, powerful, relentless. I risked a glance over my shoulder, but couldn't see anything through the thick trees and flying snow. I kept going, my lungs burning, my legs screaming with exhaustion. The deep snow made every step a battle. I stumbled over a buried log and nearly went down face first. My knee hit something hard under the snow, a rock maybe, and pain shot through my leg. I kept going anyway. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 50 yards, my legs gave out completely. I fell forward into a deep drift, snow going up my nose and into my mouth. I rolled onto my back, gasping, coughing up snow, my whole body shaking. I couldn't go any further. I was done. That's when the smell hit me. The smell was like nothing I'd ever experienced before, and I hope I never experience anything like it again. It was thick enough to taste, so strong that it cut through the clean, cold winter air like a physical force. I've smelled dead animals before. I've been around livestock. I've smelled garbage that's been sitting in the sun. This was all of that combined and multiplied by 10. It was rotten and musky and wild all at once. Like decay and wet animal and something else I couldn't identify. Something primal that triggered every warning signal in my brain. The odor was so powerful, it made my eyes water instantly. My stomach clenched, and I had to fight the urge to gag. I'd read about people describing this smell in stories about wilderness encounters, but reading about it and experiencing it are completely different things. I lay there in the snow, trying not to move, trying not even to breathe deeply because pulling that smell into my lungs made me want to vomit. My chest was heaving from the run, my body demanding air, but I tried to take shallow breaths through my mouth. It didn't help much. The smell was everywhere, coating the inside of my mouth and throat. That's when I heard the breathing. Close by, maybe 40 feet away, maybe less, heavy and rhythmic, each exhale creating a visible cloud of vapor in the freezing air. I could see the mist rising above the small ridge where I'd fallen, see it hanging in the air before slowly dissipating. Whatever was making that breath had lungs much bigger than human lungs. Each exhale seemed to go on forever. I stayed completely still. Every muscle in my body was locked tight with fear and exhaustion. I wanted to get up and run, but I knew I couldn't. I'd already pushed myself as hard as I could, and my legs were done. If whatever was out there wanted to get me now, I had no chance of getting away. So I stayed frozen, barely breathing, watching those clouds of vapor and hoping it wouldn't come closer. The breathing continued for what felt like an eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could feel the cold wetness of snow melting against my back, could taste that terrible smell with every shallow breath. Time seemed to stretch out. Seconds felt like minutes. Then I saw movement. A shadow passed between the trees ahead of me just for a moment. It was enormous, broader than any human, taller than should be possible. The shape moved behind a cluster of snow-laden pines, and I lost sight of it. But I could still hear it moving, hear its feet crunching through the snow, hear branches being pushed aside. The shadow appeared again, closer now, moving from right to left across my field of vision. I caught a glimpse of dark fur, matted and thick, covered in bits of ice and snow that sparkled in the filtered sunlight. The creature was massive. There was no other word for it. Just the part of it I could see through the trees was bigger than a large man. The breathing stopped suddenly. Total silence for a moment that seemed to last forever. Then I heard footsteps crunching through snow, but they were moving away, getting fainter. Whatever it was leaving, moving off through the forest. But I didn't move yet. I lay there in the snow for another 5 minutes, maybe longer, listening hard for any sound. My body was starting to shiver now from lying in the cold snow, but I didn't care. I needed to be sure it was really gone. Eventually, when my shivering got bad enough that I knew I had to move or risk serious hypothermia, I slowly sat up. My back and legs were soaked from lying in the snow, and I was already feeling the dangerous cold seeping into my core. I looked around carefully, scanning the trees in every direction. That's when I saw the tracks. They were in the snow about 40 feet from where I'd fallen, in the exact spot where I'd heard the breathing. The footprints were enormous, at least 18 inches long, maybe more. I could see 4 clear toe impressions in each print, pressed deep into the snow. The prints were so deep that whatever made them had to be incredibly heavy. As I studied the tracks, following them with my eyes, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The prints didn't just come from one direction and leave in another. They went in a circle. The creature had walked all the way around where I'd been lying in the snow. It had circled me completely while I was down, getting a good look from every angle. The thought of that thing walking around me while I was helpless made my skin crawl. I got to my feet slowly, everything hurting. My shoulder ached from the landing, my knee throbbed where I'd hit it during the run. My legs felt like rubber, but I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving, had to get down the mountain, had to find help. I checked my direction as best I could by the angle of the sun and started walking again, changing my path to head more directly downhill. The terrain got rougher as I went. The snow was deeper in some places, shallower in others where the wind had blown it around. I had to push through thick brush that caught on my pack and my clothes. At one point, my jacket got caught on a branch and tore. I heard the fabric rip but didn't stop to check the damage. It didn't matter, I just kept moving. After maybe 30 minutes of hard hiking, something ahead caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a dead tree standing upright, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't natural. It was branches, multiple branches that had been broken off trees and stuck upright in the snow. They were arranged in an X pattern, deliberately placed, standing about 7 feet tall. I stopped and stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't something that happened naturally. Trees don't break themselves and arrange themselves in patterns. This was made, constructed, on purpose. I looked around and spotted another one about 50 yards away through the trees. Same thing, branches arranged in an X, stuck upright in the snow. Then I saw a third one and a fourth. They were scattered through the section of forest, maybe a dozen of them that I could see. Some were taller than others. A few were 8 or 9 feet high, way too tall for anyone to reach from the ground without climbing. I'd read about things like this before in stories about strange encounters in the wilderness, tree structures, markers of some kind, territory boundaries maybe, warnings. I didn't know what they meant, but seeing them filled me with a sense of dread that settled into my stomach like a lead weight. As I stood there trying to decide what to do, I realized something else. The structures weren't randomly placed. They formed a rough line, and I'd been walking parallel to that line without realizing it. I'd been moving along the edge of something, a boundary, a territory marker, something. I started looking more carefully at the ground, and that's when I saw them everywhere. Tracks. Massive footprints crisscrossing the area, some fresh with snow still collapsing into them, some older and partially filled in by wind and light snowfall. This wasn't one creature passing through, this was its home range. These were paths it used regularly, traveled often. I was deep in its territory now. Some of the prints led from one tree structure to another. Others went off in different directions into thicker forest or up toward higher elevations. The sheer number of tracks was overwhelming. This creature, or maybe more than one creature, spent a lot of time in this area. This was its place, not mine. I was the intruder here. I noticed other things too now that I was looking more carefully. Scratch marks on tree trunks, too high up for any bear. Branches bent and broken in ways that didn't look natural. Areas where something large had bedded down in the snow, leaving depressions in the shape of a massive body. Signs were everywhere once I started seeing them. The sense of being watched was overwhelming now. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. My hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was standing in the middle of someone's living room uninvited. Every shadow in the forest looked threatening. Every sound made me jump. I changed direction sharply, heading more steeply downhill, away from the tree structures. I didn't care about the rough terrain anymore. Didn't care that I was probably going to get lost or turned around. I just wanted to get away from this area, get out of whatever territory I'd wandered into. The slope was steep here, and the snow was unstable in places. I half slid, half fell down a rocky section, using trees to slow my descent. My pack caught on a low branch and nearly yanked me backward. The strap dug into my shoulder painfully, but I twisted free and kept going. My hands were getting seriously cold now. Even inside my gloves, my fingers were going numb. My face was starting to hurt from the cold air. I knew these were early warning signs of frostbite, but I couldn't stop to warm up. Not here, not in the middle of this thing's territory. The steep descent led me into a ravine that I hadn't seen from above. The sides were steep and rocky, with just enough snow coverage to make them treacherous. I had to sit down and slide on my rear end to get to the bottom. Snow going down the back of my jacket and pants. By the time I reached the ravine floor, I was soaked and shivering. At the bottom was a small stream, mostly frozen over, but with a little running water visible in the middle, where the current was too fast to freeze completely. The sound of that running water was the first normal, natural sound I'd heard in what felt like hours. It was almost comforting. I paused to catch my breath, leaning against a large rock. My legs were shaking from exhaustion and cold. I knew I should keep moving, but I needed just a moment to rest. I thought about trying to drink from the stream, but decided against it. Stopping for that long felt too dangerous. That's when I looked up and saw it. The creature was on the opposite bank, maybe 60 feet away. It was facing slightly away from me, bent over at the stream's edge, using its hands to break through the ice. It hadn't noticed me yet. It was focused completely on what it was doing. This was the first clear, unobstructed view I'd had of it, and I couldn't look away even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. The thing was massive, 8.5 feet tall at least, maybe more. It was hard to judge from my angle, but it towered over the rocks around it. The body was covered in thick, reddish-brown fur that looked almost shaggy in places, longer around the shoulders and arms. The fur was matted with ice and snow, frosted at the tips like it had been out in the cold for hours. The shoulders were enormous, twice as broad as any human's. The muscle structure was visible even under all that fur, powerful, built for strength. The arms were incredibly long, hanging past where its knees would be, ending in hands that looked impossibly large even from this distance. The head was cone-shaped, coming to a slight point at the top. There was no visible neck. The head sat directly on those massive shoulders. From the side, I could see that the face was flatter than an ape's, more human-like in profile, but there was something fundamentally wrong about it in ways I couldn't quite articulate. It was like looking at something that was almost human but had gone down a different evolutionary path. I watched as it cupped water in its hands and brought it to its mouth. The hands were huge, had to be a foot across, with fingers as thick as broom handles. They were covered in the same reddish-brown fur as the rest of its body, but I could see dark skin visible on the palms. The nails were dark and curved, caked with dirt and ice. I was still holding my breath, still frozen in place, when I made the mistake that changed everything. I tried to take a step backward, trying to get more distance, and my foot came down on a branch that was buried under the snow. The branch snapped with a crack that echoed through the ravine like a gunshot. The creature's head snapped up. Water dripped from its mouth as it turned toward me, and for the second time that day, we made direct eye contact. The eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they were looking right at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. These weren't the eyes of a dumb animal. There was intelligence there, awareness, thought. It was looking at me the way a person looks at another person, studying me, figuring me out, assessing me. Its lips pulled back, showing teeth. They were large and yellowed, definitely not human, but not quite like an ape's either. A low, rumbling growl came from deep in its chest, a sound so low I felt it more than heard it. The sound vibrated through the air, resonating in my chest, making my bones ache. It echoed off the ravine walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The creature's breath came out in huge clouds of vapor in the cold air. Each exhale created a mist that hung in the air for a moment before dissipating. And with each breath, that terrible smell washed over me again, even from 60 feet away. We stood there for maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like time had stopped. Those dark eyes boring into mine, that rumbling growl making my chest vibrate, the smell filling my nose and mouth. Every detail was crystal clear, burned into my memory. Then it moved. The creature took 3 enormous strides toward me, each one covering at least 7 feet. Snow exploded around its feet with each step, flying up in clouds. In less than 2 seconds, it had covered 20 feet, maybe more. The ground seemed to shake with each impact. That broke the spell. I turned and ran. I crashed through the ravine, not even trying to pick a path anymore, just running blind. Branches whipped across my face. I felt one scratch across my cheek, felt the sting and wetness of blood. My feet caught on buried rocks and roots. I stumbled, caught myself, kept going. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase. But it wasn't running, it didn't need to. Its walking pace was faster than my all-out sprint. I could hear those heavy footfalls, steady and relentless, crunching through snow and over rocks. It wasn't even hurrying. It knew it could catch me whenever it wanted. My lungs were burning from the cold air. Each breath felt like I was inhaling knives. My legs were beyond exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline and terror now. The weight of the pack was killing me, the straps digging into my shoulders, throwing off my balance with every step. But I couldn't drop it. The pack had my emergency gear, my survival supplies. Without it, I'd be dead from exposure within hours. I heard a loud grunt from behind me, and then a massive, snow-covered log crashed down ahead of me, landing across my path with enough force to send snow flying in all directions. I had to jump to avoid it, nearly went down, somehow kept my feet under me. I risked a glance back and saw the creature maybe 40 feet behind me. It had picked up a fallen tree, a tree that must have weighed hundreds of pounds, and thrown it. The display of strength was beyond comprehension. My tracks through the snow were obvious, a clear trail showing exactly where I'd gone. There was no way to hide my path, no way to lose it. Every step I took left evidence. I might as well have been leaving signs saying, "Went this way." Ahead, I spotted a cluster of large boulders, massive rocks that had probably tumbled down from higher up the mountain centuries ago. They were jumbled together, creating gaps and crevices between them. I made for them without thinking, operating purely on instinct now. Some primitive part of my brain recognized them as cover, as protection. I reached the rocks and squeezed into a crevice between two of the largest boulders. The gap was narrow, just barely wide enough for me to fit through with my pack. I wedged myself as far back as I could go, pushing into the tight space until my back hit solid rock. Snow was piled around the opening, which I hoped would hide me a little, make me less visible. I pressed myself into the narrow space and tried to control my breathing. My chest was heaving, my lungs burning, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My breath came out in gasps that created clouds of vapor that might give away my position. I tried to breathe slower, tried to make less noise, but my body was demanding air and wouldn't cooperate. I could hear the creature approaching, those heavy footfalls getting closer, steady and unhurried. Crunch, crunch, crunch through the snow. It wasn't rushing, it knew where I'd gone. My tracks led right to the boulders, and there was nowhere else I could have gone. It knew I was in here somewhere. The footsteps stopped near the boulders, close, very close. I could smell it again, that terrible odor seeping into my little crevice, making my eyes water. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to muffle my breathing, trying not to gag from the smell. Then I saw the hand. It reached into the crevice from the side, feeling around blind. The massive, fur-covered hand moving slowly, methodically, exploring the space. Each finger was as thick as a broom handle, covered in coarse, reddish-brown fur with dark, curved nails at the tips. The nails were caked with dirt and ice, broken and jagged in places. I watched that hand move closer, paralyzed with fear. The fingers spread wide, reaching, searching. They moved past where my feet were, just inches away from my leg. If I'd been 6 inches further forward, it would have touched me. The hand continued exploring, feeling the rock walls, the ground, searching methodically. Then the creature started pulling at the rocks. I heard grinding, felt vibrations through the stone I was pressed against. The whole boulder structure shook. One of the rocks shifted slightly with a sound like grinding thunder. A crack of daylight appeared above me that hadn't been there before, showing where the rocks had moved. The creature was strong enough to move these boulders. These weren't small rocks. They had to weigh thousands of pounds each. But it was pulling on them, trying to widen the gap, trying to get to me. If it moved that rock much more, the whole structure might collapse, or the opening would get wide enough that I'd be completely exposed. I was going to die here. The thought was crystal clear in my mind. This thing was going to pull these rocks apart and get to me, and there was nothing I could do about it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled in my pack, trying to be quiet, trying not to draw attention. My fingers, numb with cold, found the canister of bear spray I'd packed. Bear spray. It was designed to stop a charging grizzly at close range. Would it work on whatever this thing was? Would it work in this cold? I'd heard that bear spray could fail in extreme cold, that the propellant might not work properly. But it was all I had, my only weapon, my only defense. The rock ground again, shifting more. The crack of daylight widened. I could see the creature's arm now, covered in that thick fur, muscles rippling under the coat as it pulled. The whole boulder was moving, tilting. Pebbles and ice rained down from above. I pointed the bear spray at the opening and pressed down hard on the trigger. The spray shot out in a stream, emptying the entire canister in one continuous burst. I aimed blind, just hoping to hit the creature, hoping the spray would work, hoping it would be enough. A roar erupted from outside the rocks. It was loud enough to hurt my ears in the confined space, so loud I felt it vibrating in my chest. The sound was pain and rage and surprise all mixed together. The hand withdrew from the crevice instantly. I heard heavy impacts against the ground, heard trees being hit with tremendous force, the sounds of something massive thrashing around, crashing through the forest. The footsteps moved away fast, faster than I'd heard them move before. The sounds got fainter, moving up the ravine and away from the boulders. I could hear trees being pushed over, hear branches snapping, hear the creature roaring in pain or anger. The sounds continued for maybe a minute, then gradually faded as it moved further away. I stayed in that crevice for over an hour, maybe longer. I completely lost track of time. I was too afraid to move, too afraid the creature was just waiting nearby for me to come out. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going started to fade, and exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. My whole body was shaking now, partly from cold and partly from fear and partly from the aftermath of all that terror. The cold was becoming dangerous. I was soaked from falling in the snow and from sweat. My clothes were wet, and in these temperatures, that was potentially fatal. I knew I had to move or risk serious hypothermia. The warning signs were already there, the uncontrollable shivering, the numbness in my fingers and toes, the way my thoughts felt slow and fuzzy. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I squeezed out of the crevice slowly, every muscle protesting. My legs were stiff and weak. My hands were so numb I could barely feel them. I emerged from the rocks and looked around carefully, ready to dive back in if I saw any sign of the creature. The area around the rocks was disturbed. Snow was kicked up everywhere. But what really caught my attention were the tracks. Massive footprints circled the boulders completely, showing where the thing had walked around and around while I was hiding inside. Some of the prints were less than 10 feet from the crevice opening. It had been so close. There were claw marks on the rocks where it had tried to pull them apart. Deep gouges in the stone that must have taken incredible force to make. I touched one of the gouges, feeling how deep it was, and my hand was shaking. The rock was solid granite. What kind of strength did it take to leave marks like that? But the creature was gone now. I'd heard it with the bear spray, and it had left. Maybe it had given up. Maybe it was done with me. I allowed myself a tiny moment of hope. Maybe the worst was over. Maybe I could make it down the mountain now without any more encounters. The sun was getting lower in the sky. It had to be mid-afternoon, maybe later. I'd lost track of time completely. The temperature felt like it had dropped another 10 degrees. My face was numb now, and I knew that was a bad sign. I needed to get moving, needed to warm up, needed to find shelter or help before nightfall. I started downhill again, moving as fast as I could with my stiff, exhausted legs. Every step hurt. My knee, the one I'd hit during the chase, was throbbing with every movement. But I kept going. I found what looked like a deer trail and followed it, hoping it would lead to lower elevation. The trail was partially filled with snow, but still easier to follow than breaking through virgin powder. After about 30 minutes of steady hiking, I spotted an old logging road ahead through the trees. My heart leapt. Roads meant people, meant civilization, meant help. Even an old, unused logging road was better than trackless wilderness. I pushed through the last section of forest and stepped out onto the road. It was covered in snow, but I could make out tire tracks underneath. Old tracks, maybe a week or more old, but tracks nonetheless. Snowmobile tracks. People came here. Not often, but they came. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt real hope. The road ran generally downhill, and I started following it. The packed snow made walking easier, and I was able to move faster than I had been in the deep powder. The forest felt different here, less oppressive, more open. I could see further in all directions. My spirits lifted slightly. I stopped to catch my breath and tried to drink from my water bottle. When I pulled it out of my pack, I realized with dismay that it was frozen solid, a block of ice. I'd been so focused on survival, so focused on the creature hunting me, that I hadn't even noticed. I couldn't remember the last time I'd taken a drink. Hours ago, I was probably seriously dehydrated on top of everything else. I was examining the frozen bottle, trying to decide if I could thaw it somehow when I saw them. Tracks in the snow ahead, crossing the logging road, fresh tracks with steam still rising from where the snow had been compressed. They'd been made within the last few minutes. All the hope I'd been feeling drained out of me like water from a broken container. My hands started shaking again as I stared at those tracks. The creature hadn't given up. It hadn't been driven off by the bear spray. It had been tracking me this entire time, staying out of sight, probably moving through the denser forest where the sound wouldn't carry as easily. And now it wasn't behind me, it was ahead of me. I walked closer to the tracks, studying them in detail. 4 clear toe impressions, each one distinct in the snow. The prints were enormous, 18 inches long at least. The depth showed the weight that had made them. This thing was incredibly heavy. The spacing between the prints suggested it had been walking slowly, deliberately, not running, not hurrying, just walking, following me, waiting. I followed the tracks with my eyes, and they led into thick forest right where the logging road continued, into the trees where I'd have to go if I wanted to keep following the road down. It was waiting for me, setting an ambush. The intelligence behind that behavior was more terrifying than the size or the strength or anything else. This wasn't a mindless animal, it was thinking, planning, using strategy. It had been herding me, pushing me in a specific direction, controlling where I went. And now it was ahead of me, waiting. I couldn't follow the road, not with the creature waiting in the trees ahead. I turned and headed perpendicular to the road, pushing back into the forest. I didn't care about direction anymore, didn't care about finding my truck or getting to civilization. I just needed to survive the night. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting the snow orange and pink. Beautiful colors that under any other circumstances I would have stopped to appreciate. Right now, they just meant I had maybe 15 minutes of light left. Maybe 20 if I was lucky. Then it would be full dark, and I'd be out here in the cold with that thing still hunting me. I needed shelter. I needed to get out of sight, get warm, survive until morning. I found a dense thicket of pine trees, their branches hanging low and heavy with snow. I crawled underneath on my hands and knees, pushing through needles and branches until I reached the center. It was dark under there, sheltered, hidden, not safe. Nowhere felt safe anymore, but at least concealed. I pulled my emergency blanket out of my pack. It was one of those thin mylar things that looked like they couldn't possibly help but actually work by reflecting body heat. I wrapped it around myself as best I could, trying to create a small, sheltered space. My wet clothes were a serious problem. Wet plus cold equals hypothermia. But I couldn't strip down and try to dry anything. It was too cold, and I didn't have any way to make fire. Darkness fell quickly. 1 minute, there was dim light filtering through the pine branches, and the next minute, it was full dark. The moon rose nearly full, providing enough light to see shapes and shadows, but not details. Everything became shades of gray and black. That's when the movement started again. I heard something large pushing through the forest near the thicket, branches cracking under weight, snow falling from disturbed trees with soft thumps. The creature was back, and it wasn't trying to be quiet. I could see its shadow occasionally, moving against the snow in the moonlight. Tall and broad, moving on 2 legs, it was circling the thicket, walking around and around, making sure I knew it was there. The behavior was deliberate, calculated, psychological. It was terrorizing me, wearing me down mentally. The circling continued for maybe an hour, around and around, steady footsteps, never hurrying, never stopping. Sometimes I'd hear it breathing, those heavy exhalations creating clouds of vapor in the cold air. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement through gaps in the branches. But mostly it just stayed out of clear sight, letting me hear it, letting me know it was there. Then the sounds started, deep, guttural noises that were almost like words, but not quite. They echoed through the forest, impossibly loud. Sometimes they came from one direction, then they'd stop, and a few minutes later, they'd come from a completely different direction. The creature was moving around the thicket, calling out from different positions. I had read about this behavior in other encounter stories, wood knocks, vocalizations, intimidation displays. It was trying to flush me out, trying to force me to run so it could chase me down in the open. Or maybe it was just toying with me, playing with its prey. Around midnight, it started shaking the pine tree above me. The whole tree swayed, and snow rained down through the branches, getting inside my shelter, melting on my emergency blanket, soaking into my clothes. I heard the trunk creaking, felt the ground shake slightly with each shove. Whatever was shaking that tree was incredibly strong. Pine trees are flexible, but this one was probably 40 feet tall. Shaking it hard enough to make snow fall from the top branches took serious force. The shaking would last for a minute or two, then stop. 10 minutes of silence where I'd start to think maybe it was over. Then it would start again. Shake the tree, wait, shake it again, over and over. The pattern continued for hours. My mind started playing tricks on me. Every shadow looked like the creature. Every sound seemed impossibly loud. Time became meaningless. I'd think an hour had passed and check my watch to find only 10 minutes had gone by. Or I'd think 10 minutes had passed and find an hour had gone. Around 3 in the morning, the creature added a new element to its campaign. It started throwing chunks of ice at the thicket. They crashed through the branches with loud snaps, hitting the ground near me. One hit my leg through my sleeping bag, a hard impact that sent pain shooting through my thigh. I knew it would leave a bruise. Another hit my pack, the impact loud enough to make me jump. The ice chunks came sporadically. One would crash through the branches, then nothing for 15 minutes, then another, then 2 in quick succession. The unpredictability was almost worse than if they'd come steadily. I couldn't relax, couldn't let my guard down even for a second. I had to stay alert, stay ready, even though exhaustion was pulling at me like quicksand. First light came slowly, the sky gradually lightening from black to dark blue to gray. I'd spent the entire night awake, listening to the creature circling and calling and throwing ice. I was beyond exhausted. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. My thoughts were slow and fuzzy. The cold had seeped into my core despite the emergency blanket, and I was shivering uncontrollably. When there was finally enough light to see, I crawled out of the thicket slowly. Every muscle in my body protested. My legs barely worked. My hands were stiff claws that could barely grip anything. My face was numb, which I knew meant frostbite. My lips were cracked and bleeding. The area around the pine trees told the story of the night. Massive footprints circled the thicket in the snow, dozens and dozens of them, showing how many times the creature had walked around my hiding place. Some of the prints were less than 10 feet from where I'd been sheltered. I'd been right there, close enough to touch if it had reached in. The thought made me feel sick. I tried to stand and nearly fell. My legs wouldn't support my weight properly. I grabbed a tree trunk and pulled myself up, holding on until I was sure I could stay upright. My pack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds when I lifted it onto my shoulders. I checked my water bottle again, still frozen solid. My lips were cracked and my mouth was dry. I hadn't had anything to drink in probably 18 hours. I was dehydrated, hypothermic, and exhausted. If I didn't find help soon, the cold and dehydration would kill me, even if the creature didn't. I started moving downhill again, going purely by instinct now. Find lower elevation, find water, find people, find help. My brain had narrowed down to those simple goals. Everything else had fallen away. After an hour of stumbling through the snow, I found another small frozen stream. The ice looked thin in the middle where the current ran fast. I used a rock to break through and drank directly from the stream, not caring that the water was probably full of parasites and bacteria. Dehydration was going to kill me today. Giardia could kill me weeks from now. Today's problem was more immediate. The cold water hurt my throat going down, but it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I drank until my stomach hurt, then drank a little more. At least I wouldn't die of dehydration. Probably. I kept following the stream downhill. Water always goes down. Eventually, this stream would meet a larger stream, which would become a creek, which would become a river. People lived near rivers. Roads followed rivers. This stream was my best bet for finding civilization. The terrain was getting more open now, less dense forest. I could see farther in all directions. The sun was fully up, and under different circumstances, it would have been a beautiful morning. Clear blue sky, fresh snow, mountains stretching into the distance. After another hour, the stream led me to that same old logging road I'd found the day before. Or maybe it was a different logging road. I didn't know and didn't care. It was a road, and roads meant people. I'd been following the logging road for maybe 20 minutes when I came around a bend and stopped dead. The creature was standing in the middle of the road 40 feet ahead, blocking the path. This was the closest I'd been to it in full daylight, and the sight made my breath catch. It stood fully upright, arms spread wide, making itself look even bigger. It was massive, at least 8.5 feet tall, maybe more. In the full light of morning, I could see every detail. The thick, reddish-brown fur covering its body, frosted with ice and snow. The enormous shoulders and arms. The cone-shaped head sitting directly on those massive shoulders with no visible neck. The face, leathery and dark brown, deeply lined. We locked eyes again. Those dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. And in that moment, I understood something. This thing had been playing with me. For the last 24 hours, it had been toying with me, terrorizing me, showing me how easily it could catch me if it wanted to. It could have killed me at any point, but it hadn't. This whole thing had been a game to it, or a display, or a lesson. The creature began pounding its chest with closed fists. The sound was like thunder booming across the mountains, echoing off the slopes. Snow fell from nearby trees with each impact. I could feel the vibrations through the ground under my feet. Then it opened its mouth and screamed. The sound started low, resonating in my chest, then went higher and higher until it was a piercing shriek that seemed to cut through my skull. The sound echoed and echoed, coming back from the mountains around us, multiplying until it seemed like the whole range was screaming. Then it charged. The creature took several quick steps forward, each one covering an impossible distance. Snow exploded around its feet with each step like powder charges going off. In 2 seconds, it covered half the distance between us. I stumbled backward, my exhausted legs nearly giving out. I put my hands up instinctively, a useless gesture of defense or submission or surrender. I don't even know what. The creature stopped about 20 feet away. It pounded the ground with both fists, and snow and frozen earth flew up from the impacts. Then it did another bluff charge, taking several more quick steps forward. Now it was close enough that I could see its breath creating clouds of vapor, close enough that the smell hit me like a physical blow, making my eyes water. close enough that if it wanted to reach out and grab me, it easily could. I made myself as big as I could, spreading my arms. Some primal part of my brain took over, the part that deals with predators, the part that knows submission means death. I yelled back at the creature with what little voice I had left. The sound that came out was weak and pathetic, barely more than a croak. My throat was raw from the cold and from screaming during the night. We stood there facing each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. The creature tilted its head, studying me with those dark, intelligent eyes. I could see its chest rising and falling with its breathing, could see the muscles moving under the fur, could see the intelligence behind those eyes making some kind of decision. Then it turned and walked away, not running, not hurrying, just walking. It deliberately moved through the deep snow beside the road instead of following the packed trail. Each step left a massive footprint, easily visible, impossible to miss. It was making sure I saw those prints, making sure I understood. This was its territory. It was letting me leave, but it wanted me to know it could have ended things differently. The creature walked about 50 yards and then turned to look back at me one more time. We made eye contact again across the distance. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest, moving between the trees and out of sight. But I knew it was still there, still watching. I stood on that logging road for a full minute after the creature disappeared, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. My legs were shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. But I forced myself to keep going. I had to keep moving, had to get out of these mountains. I followed the logging road downhill, stumbling more than walking. My legs barely functioned. I fell twice in the snow and had to force myself back up both times. Everything hurt. My face, my hands, my feet, my chest. Every breath hurt, every step hurt. But I kept going. Then I heard it. The most beautiful sound I'd ever heard in my life. A snowmobile engine in the distance, somewhere ahead on the road. The sound of civilization, of rescue, of survival. I tried to run toward the sound and immediately fell again. My legs just wouldn't do it. I got back up and waved my arms frantically, even though whoever it was probably couldn't see me yet. I kept waving and stumbling forward, desperate, terrified they'd pass by without seeing me. 2 snowmobiles came around a bend in the road. They were moving fast, but when the drivers saw me, they both stopped immediately. The engines cut out and 2 guys got off their machines. They were locals, judging by their gear, heavy winter coats, good boots, experience with these conditions. They took one look at me and their expressions changed from curious to alarmed. I must have looked terrible. Covered in ice and snow, clothes torn, face probably showing signs of frostbite, barely able to stand. One of them came over and grabbed my arm to steady me. They asked what happened, if I was hurt, where I'd come from. I opened my mouth to tell them the truth about the creature, about being hunted through the mountains for more than 24 hours, about the terror and the cold and the intelligence behind those dark eyes. But I stopped myself. How could I explain it? How could I make them understand? They'd think I was crazy, delirious from hypothermia. They'd think I'd hallucinated the whole thing. So I told them I'd had an emergency landing with my paraglider and got turned around in the mountains. They accepted that explanation without question. One of them pulled out a thermos and poured me hot coffee. The first sip was almost painful, the heat intense after being cold for so long. But it was the best thing I'd ever tasted in my life. I drank it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, feeling my frozen core start to thaw just a little. They radioed for help, and another snowmobile arrived within 30 minutes. The rescue driver was professional, efficient. He helped me onto his machine, made sure I was secure, and we started down the mountain. As we were getting ready to leave, one of the hunters who'd found me pointed to tracks crossing the road. They were massive, easily visible in the snow, 4-toed prints, 18 inches long, impossibly deep. "Those are fresh," he said quietly, not looking at me. "Been seeing tracks like that for 20 years up here." He didn't say anything else, didn't elaborate, didn't explain, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He'd seen things too, had his own encounters, knew what was out there in those mountains. The silence that followed his statement was heavier than any words could have been. During the snowmobile ride down the mountain, we passed several more sets of massive tracks. Some crossed the logging road, fresh prints in the snow. Others ran parallel to the road for 100 yards or more before disappearing into the forest. Each time I saw them, my stomach clenched. The creature had followed me almost to the point of rescue. Maybe it had been watching when the snowmobilers found me. Maybe it had been close enough to hear us talking, to see me climb onto the rescue snowmobile. The thought made my skin crawl even now, even surrounded by people, even headed towards safety. We reached a small ranger station where they had me checked out by a medic. I had minor frostbite on my fingers, toes, and nose. Early stage hypothermia, severe dehydration, multiple bruises and scratches. The medic said I was lucky. Another few hours in those conditions and the cold would have killed me. I knew he was right. I'd been close to the edge. The sheriff took a statement. I stuck with my story about a paragliding accident and getting lost. He wrote it all down, professional and thorough, but at the end he mentioned that there had been other incidents in that area, hikers reporting being followed, strange tracks appearing near campsites, unusual sounds in the night. One hunter had disappeared 3 years ago in that same general area and was never found. He didn't say anything else, but the way he looked at me suggested he knew there was more to my story than I was telling. But he didn't push. Maybe he had heard stories before. Maybe he knew that some things were better left unsaid. They drove me back to my truck. It was still there, buried under fresh snow, right where I'd left it 2 days ago. It seemed like a lifetime had passed. My paragliding equipment was still in the back. Looking at it, I could barely remember the excitement I'd felt launching from that peak, the joy of that perfect flight. That person felt like someone else entirely. I started the truck and blasted the heat as high as it would go. For the first hour of driving, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Part of me expected to see something massive standing on the road behind me, watching me leave its territory. But there was nothing there, just empty road and snow-covered mountains. It's been over a year since that trip. The physical injuries healed fairly quickly. The frostbite on my fingers left them sensitive to cold, and they still hurt when the temperature drops. The bruises and scratches faded, my body recovered. But the psychological scars are still there. I still have nightmares about those dark, intelligent eyes staring at me across the ravine. The sound of something massive walking through snow in the darkness. The moment I saw those fresh footprints ahead of me on the logging road and realized I wasn't just being chased, I was being hunted by something that thought and planned and strategized. I still paraglide. I can't give it up completely. It's too much a part of who I am. But I've changed my approach entirely. No more winter launches, no more remote locations where I'd be alone if something went wrong. I stick to popular flying sites now, places with other pilots around, places near civilization. I've thought a lot about what happened to me in those mountains, about what I saw, what hunted me for more than 24 hours through sub-zero temperatures and deep snow. I've read accounts of other encounters, other people who've had experiences they can't explain. And what strikes me most is the intelligence behind the behavior. This wasn't a mindless animal, the tracking, the circling, the psychological warfare during the night. That was something thinking, planning, using complex strategies. It could have killed me at any point. It was strong enough to move boulders, fast enough to keep up with me through miles of deep snow, patient enough to terrorize me all night without giving up. But it didn't kill me. It just made absolutely certain I knew it could have. Maybe it was sending a message. Maybe it was establishing boundaries. Maybe it was warning me to stay out of its territory. Or maybe it was just playing the way a cat plays with a mouse before letting it go. I'll never know the answer to that. What I do know is that those mountains are still there. That creature, or maybe multiple creatures, are still up there, living in those thousands of square miles of wilderness. And every winter, when the snow is deep and the cold keeps most people away, it has the whole range to itself. I think about the hunter who found me, the one who said he'd been seeing those tracks for 20 years. I wonder how many other people have had experiences up there that they never talk about because they know no one will believe them. I wonder how many people have seen things they can't explain and chosen to stay silent rather than face the ridicule and doubt. The thing that keeps me up at night sometimes is wondering about the people who didn't make it out. The hunter who disappeared 3 years ago. All the others over the years who went into those mountains and never came back. Were they hunted the same way I was? Did they see the same thing I saw? Did they make it through the night, or did something different happen to them? I was lucky. Everything had to go right for me to survive. The snowmobilers had to happen to be checking their trap lines that exact morning. I had to make it through the night without dying from hypothermia. The bear spray had to work despite the extreme cold. Any one of those things goes wrong and I don't make it out. That creature is still out there, still walking through those mountains, leaving tracks in the snow that no one wants to follow, still watching anyone who ventures into its territory. And the next person who launches from those remote peaks and happens to make eye contact with something impossible might not be as lucky as I was. That's why I'm telling you this, not because I expect you to believe me, I know how it sounds, but because if you ever find yourself in remote mountains, especially in winter, and you see something on a distant ridge that looks wrong, that looks too big to be human, change your course. Get out of there. Don't investigate. Don't try to get a better look. Just leave. Because whatever I encountered, whatever hunted me through those frozen mountains, it's still there. It knows that terrain better than any human ever will. And it's patient. It can wait for days, weeks, months for the right conditions, the right person, the right opportunity. The wilderness is beautiful and awe-inspiring, but it's also dangerous in ways most people never consider. We think about avalanches and exposure and getting lost. We prepare for bears and mountain lions and natural hazards. But there are some dangers we don't prepare for because we don't believe they exist. I didn't believe either. Not really. I'd heard the stories, read the accounts, seen the blurry photos. But I didn't truly believe until I saw those eyes looking back at me from that distant peak. Until I heard those impossibly loud vocalizations echoing through the forest at night. Until I saw those massive footprints circling my hiding place, proving that something enormous had been walking around me while I cowered in the dark. Now I believe. And now I know that those mountains hold secrets we're not meant to discover. And maybe it's better that way. Maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved. Maybe some territories are better left unexplored. All I know for certain is that I'll never forget those 24 hours. Never forget the terror of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. Never forget the intelligence behind those dark eyes, and I'll never go back to those mountains in winter. Because whatever lives up there, it's still waiting, still watching, still leaving tracks in the snow for anyone brave or foolish enough to follow. For more interesting stories, check this out.